The biblical story of Esther is one of those that seems simple at first glance, but the more you look, the deeper it becomes. The Bible presents a young woman who appears ordinary, yet without realizing it, she is placed at the center of one of the greatest reversals in biblical history. There are no explicit miracles, no prophets speaking out loud, and still God is at work in every detail. Esther confronts us with a quiet question. What if your life also carries more meaning than you imagine? Throughout the book of Esther, the Bible reveals that seemingly small decisions can carry enormous consequences. A conversation, a moment of silence, a timely stance. The biblical story shows that purpose does not always come with immediate clarity, but it almost always requires courage, wisdom, and faith. Esther does not choose the setting, but she chooses how to respond to it, and that changes everything. Perhaps the most provoking aspect of Esther's biblical story is realizing that God acts even when He is not mentioned. The Bible teaches us that the absence of mention is not the absence of presence. Behind the scenes, everything is being aligned. This creates an immediate connection with our own reality, where God often seems silent, but continues to work. Esther shows that trusting this process is an essential part of the journey. In this content, you will dive into the deepest lessons of the book of Esther and discover how this biblical story remains profoundly relevant today. Each chapter reveals practical principles for decisions, relationships, faith, and purpose. If you desire to better understand the Bible and apply its teachings to your life in a real and transformative way, this study is for you. So be sure to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and walk with us through more content that deepens your understanding of the Bible and strengthens your faith. Now, take a deep breath, because the story of Esther may say far more about your life than you imagine. The biblical story of Esther presents one of those moments when silence stops being a safe option and becomes a dangerous choice. Faced with a decree that threatened her people, the Bible shows that Esther reached a point of no return. It was not only an external crisis, but an internal calling. The narrative makes it clear that there are situations in which neutrality does not protect, it only postpones the consequences. It is in this setting that courage begins to take on a concrete form. The first lesson we learn from Esther is courage to take a stand in critical moments. When Mordecai confronts her with reality, he reveals something profound within the biblical story. There is always a cost to omission. Esther understands that her position was not the result of chance, but of purpose. The Bible leads us to see that certain moments demand a voice, even when that voice trembles. Courage here is not bravado, but responsibility embraced. This lesson teaches that courage is not born from the absence of fear, but from clarity of purpose. Esther does not ignore the risk. She faces it with awareness. The biblical story does not romanticize the process. On the contrary, it exposes the tension, the danger, and the uncertainty. The Bible shows that choosing to take a stand may require giving up comfort and security. Still, there are times when not acting is more destructive than acting. In everyday life, this courage appears in practical and often silent choices. Defending what is right when everyone else prefers what is convenient, speaking the truth when silence seems more advantageous, assuming responsibilities no one else wants to carry. The biblical story of Esther resonates because it reflects universal dilemmas. The Bible points out that faithfulness to values is proven precisely under pressure. That is, when character moves beyond words. Another striking detail is that Esther does not shift the responsibility onto others. The Bible makes it clear that deliverance could come from another place, but the decision still had to be made. The biblical story teaches that trusting someone else to act does not exempt anyone from their own choices. Esther understands that her silence would bring direct consequences. This awareness transforms fear into thoughtful action. The second lesson we learn from Esther is that courage also requires a willingness to pay the price. When she declares, "If I perish, I perish," the Bible records a conscious surrender. There is no excessive dramatization. only acceptance of the risk. The biblical story shows that right decisions do not always offer immediate guarantees. Sometimes, all that exists is the conviction of doing what is right. This lesson reveals that faith and courage walk together, even when the outcome remains hidden. The Bible teaches that acting with integrity does not mean controlling results. Esther moves forward without knowing how the king will respond. The biblical story highlights that true courage is shown before the answer comes, not after it. It is an inner posture that precedes any external validation. There is also a subtle lesson. Courage is not impulsiveness. Esther does not enter the king's presence driven by desperation, but by a matured conviction. The Bible shows that firm decisions can also be calm. The biblical story teaches that mature courage knows how to wait for the right moment, but does not retreat when that moment arrives. This balance prepares the ground for what comes next. By embracing her position, Esther opens the way for something even deeper, the challenge of dealing with her identity and discerning the right time to reveal it. The biblical story begins to guide the reader toward a new level of understanding, where courage and wisdom walk side by side. The Bible suggests that taking a stand is only the beginning of a greater journey, one that will require discernment, strategy, and sensitivity in the steps ahead. The biblical story of Esther reveals that courage without wisdom can turn into recklessness. After deciding to take a stand, she does not rush, skip steps, or allow pressure to dictate her actions. The Bible shows a woman who understands that good causes also require good guidance. Not everything is resolved with intensity. Some things are resolved with discernment. At this point, the narrative begins to highlight the value of strategy. The third lesson we learn from Esther is the importance of proper timing. The Bible records that even though she has access to the king, she chooses not to make her request immediately. Esther observes the environment, senses the atmosphere, and waits for the right moment. The biblical story teaches that speaking too early can be just as harmful as speaking too late. Knowing how to wait is a quiet form of wisdom. This lesson dismantles the idea that urgency always demands speed. Esther carries a just cause, but does not allow herself to be ruled by anxiety. The Bible shows that she understands the human heart needs preparation. In the biblical story, time stops being an obstacle and becomes a tool. The right moment amplifies the right message. In everyday life, this principle applies to difficult conversations, important decisions, and sensitive conflicts. The biblical story of Esther teaches that not every truth needs to be delivered all at once. The Bible points out that discernment includes recognizing when the other person is ready to listen. Waiting is not retreat. It is advancing intelligently. Strategic silence also communicates. The fourth lesson we learn from Esther is the value of strategic planning under pressure. The Bible describes two carefully organized banquets, showing that nothing was improvised. Esther creates a favorable environment before presenting her request. The biblical story shows that she thinks in stages, not emotional outbursts. Planning, in this context, is an act of wisdom. This planning reveals emotional maturity and clarity of purpose. The Bible teaches that Esther does not confront in the heat of fear, but in the time of clarity. Instead of accusing, she guides. The biblical story highlights that strategy is not manipulation, but the organization of the path. Every detail prepares the ground for revelation. Pressure does not paralyze Esther. She organizes it. The Bible shows that even without controlling outcomes, she controls her posture. The biblical story teaches that planning does not guarantee success, but it reduces chaos. Under extreme risk, Esther chooses coherence over impulse. This turns tension into real opportunity. This chapter reinforces that wisdom is the combination of patience and intention. The biblical story of Esther makes it clear that great turning points do not happen by accident. The Bible suggests that before confrontation, there is preparation. And when preparation meets the right moment, the next chapter of the story begins to unfold even more deeply. The biblical story of Esther takes an important turn by showing that strategy and courage alone are not enough to sustain such a great mission. Before any decisive action, the Bible presents an inner and collective movement. Esther understands that there are battles that cannot be won only with well-chosen words or well-made plans. The biblical narrative reveals that there is an invisible preparation that precedes major visible movements. This is where dependence on God becomes central. The fifth lesson we learn from Esther is the power of prayer and communal fasting. The Bible records that Esther calls her people to fast with her before entering the king's presence. The biblical story shows that this is not a symbolic gesture, but a deep spiritual preparation. Esther recognizes that the strength needed for that moment would not come only from her position. The Bible teaches that some decisions require spiritual alignment before practical action. This lesson reveals that fasting is not isolation, but unity. Esther does not carry the responsibility alone. She involves others in the process. The biblical story teaches that when the cause is great, the cry must also be collective. The Bible shows that spiritual preparation strengthens the mind, the heart, and inner clarity. Before facing external risk, Esther confronts her internal dependence. In everyday life, this principle is reflected when a person acknowledges their limits. The biblical story of Esther teaches that not everything is resolved through human effort. The Bible points out that seeking God before important decisions brings perspective, humility, and direction. Prayer and fasting do not change only circumstances. They change the one who decides. This inner transformation prepares the ground for firmer actions. The sixth lesson we learn from Esther is trust in divine providence. The Bible does not explicitly mention God in the book, yet His action is evident in the details. The biblical story shows seemingly random events aligning with precision. Esther trusts even without seeing the full picture. The Bible teaches that God often works behind the scenes, beyond human control. This lesson invites us to look beyond what is visible. While Esther waits, events outside her reach begin to align. The biblical story reveals that providence does not depend on human recognition to operate. The Bible shows that trusting God is not passivity, but resting while moving forward. Esther advances, knowing she does not walk alone. Trust in divine providence lifts the burden of absolute control. The biblical story of Esther teaches that doing one's part does not mean carrying the entire outcome. The Bible points out that there are invisible gears in motion. Esther does not force results. She remains faithful to the process. This transforms anxiety into hope. This chapter makes it clear that dependence on God does not weaken action. It sustains it. The biblical story of Esther prepares the reader to see that when the invisible is honored, the visible begins to move. The Bible suggests that great reversals are born in moments of quiet surrender, and it is from this place of trust that the next stage of the story begins to emerge with strength. The biblical story of Esther shows that influence is not merely a matter of position, but of intention. Reaching the palace was not the end of her story. It was the beginning of a greater responsibility. The Bible makes it clear that authority that does not serve others eventually loses its meaning. Esther understands that her place of privilege does not exist for personal benefit, but to generate protection and life. Here, the biblical narrative begins to reveal the transformative power of well-used influence. The seventh lesson we learn from Esther is to use influence to help others. When she finally speaks, she does not do so only to save herself, but to intercede for her people. The Bible shows that Esther risks her favor to protect lives. The biblical story teaches that true influence is revealed when someone uses their voice on behalf of those who cannot speak. Healthy power always points outward, never only inward. This lesson challenges the idea that success is about accumulating personal advantages. Esther could have remained safe, but she chooses exposure. The Bible reveals that influence without compassion turns into vanity. The biblical story teaches that high positions are tools, not trophies. When Esther speaks, she turns access into intercession and position into service. In everyday life, this lesson applies to any environment where some level of influence exists. The biblical story of Esther shows that someone is always being impacted by the decisions we make. The Bible points out that using influence means choosing who will benefit from our silence or from our voice. Small actions, when done with the right intention, produce great effects. Esther understands this deeply. The eighth lesson we learn from Esther is the importance of building relationships with wisdom. The Bible shows that Esther gains favor not through imposition, but through posture. She observes, respects, listens, and acts with sensitivity. The biblical story reveals that healthy relationships open doors that no amount of force can open. Esther understands that connection comes before confrontation. This relational wisdom is not superficial. It is strategic and human. The Bible teaches that Esther knows how to present herself, how to speak, and how to wait. The biblical story shows that favor is not accidental. It is the result of consistent character. Building relationships requires patience, empathy, and discernment. Esther does not manipulate people. She honors processes. The biblical narrative also makes it clear that Esther does not burn bridges while seeking justice. She maintains respect even in high-tension situations. The Bible teaches that well-built relationships sustain difficult decisions. The biblical story shows that firmness does not need to be aggressive. Esther proves that relational wisdom is a higher form of leadership. This chapter teaches that influence and relationships walk together. The biblical story of Esther prepares the reader to see that major changes do not happen in isolation. The Bible suggests that those who know how to care for people are better prepared to lead transformations. And it is precisely this balance that opens the way for the great reversal that is about to unfold in the next chapter. The biblical story of Esther reaches a point where everything seems impossible to reverse. A decree of death had already been sealed. Laws were irrevocable, and the situation appeared final. Still, the Bible shows that the apparent end was not the real end. The biblical narrative reveals that when all human paths are closed, new paths begin to emerge in unexpected ways. This is where hope takes on concrete form. The ninth lesson we learn from Esther is that God can reverse impossible situations. The Bible describes a radical change of scenario. What was a death sentence becomes a decree of life. The biblical story shows that those who were meant to be destroyed are now able to defend themselves and prevail. This reversal does not happen by chance, but as the result of a sequence of aligned decisions. The Bible teaches that no situation is final when God is at work. This lesson reveals that reversal often comes from where it is least expected. The biblical story of Esther shows power changing hands, roles being reversed, and threats losing their strength. The Bible points out that what seemed delayed was actually being prepared. The text shows that God not only delivers, but also restores dignity and honor. Hope is born when human logic is surpassed. In everyday life, this truth teaches that final diagnoses are not always truly final. The biblical story of Esther reminds us that circumstances can change completely. The Bible points out that persevering in faithfulness keeps a person positioned to experience reversal. The situation may seem static, but invisible movements are still taking place. Hope is sustained even when the facts have not yet changed. The 10th lesson we learn from Esther is the importance of celebrating victories and remembering deliverance. The Bible records that the people establish a festival so that what happened would not be forgotten. The biblical story shows that collective memory strengthens faith for the future. Celebration is not excess, it is recognition. The Bible teaches that remembering deliverance guards the heart against forgetfulness and ingratitude. This celebration does not come from euphoria, but from awareness. The biblical story of Esther shows that marking victory helps keep the people's identity alive. The Bible points out that when deeds are remembered, hope is renewed. Creating spiritual memorials strengthens future generations. Lived deliverance becomes lasting teaching. The biblical narrative also reveals that celebration does not erase past pain, but redefines the story. the Bible shows that suffering was not in vain. The biblical story of Esther teaches that what almost destroyed becomes testimony. Celebration turns trauma into healed memory. This produces maturity and gratitude. This chapter closes the story by showing that hope is not illusion, but a response to God's action. The biblical story of Esther prepares the reader to understand that after reversal comes responsibility, to remember, to teach, and to live differently. The Bible suggests that those who learn to celebrate also learn to trust again, and it is from this awareness that new beginnings arise. When we look at the biblical story of Esther as a whole, it becomes clear that this book is not merely an ancient account, but a spiritual mirror. The Bible leads us through a narrative where human decisions, courage, wisdom, and dependence are woven together with divine providence, even when God is not mentioned directly. Esther teaches us that faith is not passivity, and that communion with God is not limited to words, but expressed through daily choices, often quiet ones, made in the secret place of the heart. The book of Esther invites us to turn our hearts back to God in a sincere way. The biblical story shows that when there is inner alignment, the outer reality begins to reorganize. Communion with God is not about escaping problems. It is about facing them with a new perspective. The Bible reveals that those who learn to listen, wait, act wisely, and trust begin to live with greater stability, even in uncertain circumstances. Esther does not only change the destiny of a people, she reveals the power of a surrendered life. This reflection leaves us with an unavoidable question. How is your walk with God today? The biblical story of Esther calls us out of superficiality and into a practical, conscious, and mature faith. The Bible shows that critical moments reveal who we are and whom we trust. When the heart turns toward God, decisions gain clarity, fear loses its grip, and hope finds room to grow. If this message spoke to you, take this moment to strengthen your communion with God and apply these lessons in your daily life. Subscribe to the channel, activate notifications, and continue walking with us through content that deepens the Bible and transforms the way faith is lived. And now, tell us in the comments, which lesson from the book of Esther inspires or impresses you the most? Your response may encourage others as well.